You're listening to the People Agenda podcast, brought to you by leading HR, workforce and payroll transformation specialist, Lace Partners.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the People Agenda podcast. My name's Debbie Mitchell from Lace Partners, and I'm joined today by my fabulous colleague, Gemma Ryall, as co-host. Hi, Gemma.
Hi, Debbie.
Nice
Glad
to have
be
you
here.
on. We're also joined today by Stuart Price, who is the CPO at Zenith. Stuart, hi.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Tell us a bit about yourself.
As you've mentioned, I have responsibility for People, Zenith, which is a UK vehicle leasing business based in Yorkshire. I also have responsibility for transformation and product, Zenith as well. And then if I go back early career, I started my career in food retail as a sort of Saturday boy while I was at college, went through management development, worked for Asda for 12 years in a range of roles across retail, logistics and head office. And then I moved to Morrison's, which I described as my safe move, my sideways move from Asda after 12 years. Did a couple of years there as head of employee relations, then moved into Cost Cutter, which was a retail franchise business, so a different operating model. That was my first exec role as HR director. And then I decided after sort of 18 years in food retail, I wanted to go and try a different sector. So I worked for a company called Virgin Care, which was a subsidiary of the Virgin Group, and went in as chief people officer, ended up doing a chief operating officer role, running a bunch of medical services across the UK. Did that for 3 years and then moved into veterinary. I did a stint called Linnaeus. Okay. And then after that came to Zenith. My three key sectors are food retail, healthcare, and now automotive and leasing.
Great. And I think we'd love to get into a few questions later about some of the similarities, differences, what you've learned in each, what transfers, what doesn't. But before we get into sort of talking around some of your experiences, we always like to start with our kind of killer question. And over to you to tell us, what is a chief people officer, Stuart?
So I think for me, first and foremost, when you are a chief of anything, whether it's people, finance, operations, you are a leader of an enterprise, you're a leader of a company first and foremost. So for me, the first thing is you're a director of the organisation, and therefore you put your people hat to one side, actually, first and foremost. Secondly, then you're the leader of the people function. And then thirdly is your own self-interest. I think for me, though, if you look at the specifics of the people role, you're the custodian of both people performance and capability, but also of the culture of the organisation. And the thing that I love about the role is that they're constantly in tension with each other. How do you maximize performance and build capability, but how do you create a really supportive, engaging, warm and welcoming environment where people want to work and give of their best? So I think that's at the heart of it. And then finally, for me, I would talk about the conscience of the business. It's the role that really can hold the mirror up and ask the really curious, great questions without operational and functional responsibility. And that's the bit of the role that I find most interesting and enjoy, because you help other people do their best work through asking those questions.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We have some papers on the different hats of the CPO, right? And things like transformation is one hat, compliance, experience, those kind of things. But when we put that out and we talked to a group of CPOs about that, somebody flagged the key thing you're missing is that conscience, right? So we've now done a paper on that. It's that sort of exploration of what is that role, and a bit to a point I'm sure we'll come to about the seat at the table and the integration or interaction with C-suite is what skills or capabilities you need to really be that conscience, and stepping into that role requires sometimes quite a bit of courage.
Yeah, I do think courage is really important, and a natural curiosity as well. You've got to want to know more and want to understand and empathise with other people. So I think courage and curiosity are probably, and conviction when you need it. The 3 C's, as sometimes is described. I think for me, the best executive leaders or board leaders, whatever terminology you use, you should be able to observe those meetings and not know really who's in what specialist role. I think I would want people to look and go, I'm not quite sure what role he does actually, because you're so invested and interested in all part of the business. And I think I've always really enjoyed asking questions about other people's worlds, and I'm really open to them asking questions about mine and challenging me and making it better.
It's also a bit about how that team operates, right? Because I know we've had some conversations before at executive level about why are we operating in silos? And part of the reason for that is as you run through the exec agenda or any senior leadership team agenda, it's, okay, finance, let's have your update. Now HR, let's have yours. Now ops, let's have, rather than what's the business doing? And to your point, asking curious questions. So I'm interested just to get the translation of that generic sort of what is a chief people officer into how does that sort of come to life in your current roles? Are there priorities? Are there things that you have to focus on but can deprioritize, for example?
I always start the year thinking about what is the business trying to achieve? What's the business goals and objectives? And then how does the people agenda underpin that? So if it's about we need to enhance performance, what is that? Where is that skills capability gap? Is it skills that we don't have? Do we need to buy them in? Can we develop them? So I always start with the sort of business goals and then think about performance. But then I also then, as I mentioned earlier, I then go to the cultural side of things and what are societal expectations? What are the things that our colleagues and communities are wrestling with that will become barriers to them being at their best? And then what do we put in place in the organisation that can help people to do that? So there's a kind of really commercial business element around performance and capability build. But then there's also what's actually getting in the way of our people doing great work. And we've done quite a lot of work here on inclusion, for example. And we know that whilst people describe it as a soft agenda in the people space, actually, if our colleagues feel included, involved, heard, respected, valued, actually they turn up, they give more discretionary effort, they give more and they perform better, they have more confidence, they ask more questions, they progress more. All of those things come through. So I think for me, it is going back to that. What's the performance agenda? What's the cultural piece that sits together? And how do you create a plan that underpins all of that?
And it's great you talked about the commercial side of things there and having to consider that. And we're seeing more and more CPOs having to think about the commercial angle, think about the return on investment on things that they're doing. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that plays out in your role at the moment and whether you're seeing more of a focus on the commercials and having to provide more data around the benefits of some of the work that you're doing?
For me, I don't think it's changed. Everybody says every year it gets harder, and that's true. You know, it is. I grew up in retail for 18 years, so I think it was drilled into me. If you couldn't show the value to the shops and the frontline colleague and the customer, it wasn't going. You didn't do it. So I describe it as you have to bring commercial consideration and operational consideration to everything that you do. That's just your license to play. And often people say to me, I can't get my agenda through the board or it won't get signed off. And if you only come at it from a cultural perspective without articulating business and commercial impact, then frankly, you won't get it through. And that's never been any different in my experience. It was probably harder in retail, slightly less hard in healthcare and reasonably hard in automotive. I think retail is probably the hardest. So I think for me, it's your license to play. And you have to start from the premise we're all here to grow the business, to serve our customers and create great workplaces. It doesn't matter what role we do, we're all here to do that. So how does your agenda add value to that? And I think you keep it that simple, it usually answers itself. And if you can't answer it, I go, don't take it into the boardroom, don't take it into the exec meeting. And I pride myself on not taking stuff in that I don't think I can get through, because if I don't believe it or I can't see the value, then I'm definitely not going to get anyone else to see it.
And it's a nice segue then into thinking about how do you get heard at the Exco and leadership, and some lovely top tips from you there around how to position things, but also pick and choose your battles when you're going in to that Exco space.
Do you know the most important thing for me with this, which is going to sound a bit soft and a bit CPO-y, if I'm honest, but the first thing for me is empathy. I think you have to walk in the shoes of other people. Problems are they trying to solve? Where are they? And I think if you can understand their plans, their challenges, and be curious to their needs and find a way to add value to them first and foremost before you seek to ask anything in return, then you build the relationships where they go, this person wants to help me. This person wants to add value to my world. For me, that might be observations around their team capability or helping them to work through some challenges that they've got in performance of their business or customer feedback. So I think if you can really empathize with where they're at, that builds the relationship. The second thing for me on that is don't stay in your swim lane. If you only bang the people drum, then funnily enough, people will only ever come and talk to you about people. They'll never see you as anything broader than that. So be curious, ask questions, get involved, and have a point of view and an opinion on stuff outside of the people space. And then they will do the same in return. And then my final one is just don't pretend you have all the answers. I think in professional lines, particularly finance, legal, people, there's an expectation that I'm going to this specialist for some specialist advice. And the reality is we don't always have the answers. So I really like to co-create things with my exco colleagues and senior leaders in the business. Here's my starter pen, probably about 85% right, but let's work together and make it 120%. How do we do that together? So I think a bit of humility in those relationships, collaboration and joint working is where I think you get the right to be heard and add the most value.
It's interesting. I listened to a podcast actually it's quite a long time ago, but it really stayed with me, where somebody talked about the power of saying, I don't know the answer, rather than pretend you do. I don't know the answer. Why don't we go figure it out together? Now, that kind of mindset and that collaborative approach is really powerful. I was just interested, Stuart, in your kind of commercial mindset, and I wondered to what extent that comes from that retail background, which is, I think we've all worked in retail at some point, you have to be on the floor, right? And no matter what I did a bit of retail management training in my very long time ago, early career. And regardless of what function you were focused on, you really needed to know the cut flower sales for this week, last week, and what that compares. So you were ingrained into that kind of mindset, and all the kind of retail hospitality environments that we work with, the clients we work with, are out on the floor regularly. We often, the CPO will call us and say, I can't do it in that window because I'm on the floor, or I'm in the store for a couple of weeks. And do you think that's that? Yeah. Do you think that's quite exclusive to that industry?
I'm sat here smiling because I've just got so many fond memories of my time in retail, and really good examples. When I was in stores as a people manager, my first kind of people HR roles, you'd rumble the store at 4:00 and you'd be out with the customers looking at what the customer saw, and you'd fix it. If it was broken for the customer, you'd fix it. And then even when progressed and ended up in a head office role, for example, at Christmas, they drag you back into the stores. It's the most important time. So you're getting out. And there was a program for senior leaders where you had to adopt a store. So every senior leader in the head office had to adopt a store. And so that store manager, if they were struggling to get things from the head office, could ring you and say, can you help me? And you really had an affinity with what was going on the front line, even though my store at that time was in bloody Aberdeen and I was in Yorkshire. But you really felt, actually, I really care about that store.
I'm part of something. Yeah. You're making me smile, because I remember 4 a.m. fresh turkey delivery at Christmas in the store I worked in. And I was a placement student at the time. 4 a.m. didn't really exist as a morning time when I was doing that. But yes, but you're really in it, right? And it is all about, turkeys wasn't my department, but in that moment, it was about making sure you were there for it. Sorry, Gemma, I jumped in.
Well, it's really interesting because we were talking earlier about not acting in silos and not having the swim lanes of HR and finance and various other bits, and it's everyone comes together to fix the problem. You go, what's the problem? What do we get to the solution from? In all of that, we've talked a little bit about history, where you've come from, and everything like that. What are your thoughts on what's the future of the CPO? What does the role look like?
I think it is going to become more collaborative and interconnected with other functions than ever. And I think if I take the most obvious one at the moment around technology, humans and computers have been working together for a long time. But I think when you put AI into it and the sophistication of the thinking and the processing that AI can and will continue to bring, you can't design the workforce now purely through a people lens. You're going to have to design workforces with technology and AI within it. So the need for the CIO and the CPO to kind of collaborate on what that looks like and how it's implemented is there. I think, again, in finance, the complexity of communication and stakeholder engagement with things like investor relations, how you take your proposition and strategy to market. I think the CPO can really play a role in what do you want people to think and feel when they read this, and what messages you want them to take away. So again, I think when there's a role for the CPO to step out of that core functional lane and add value. And then if I look at the business areas, the operational areas, the commercial areas, leadership is so hard now. Middle leaders, junior leaders, they're expected to be everything from driving operational performance, delivering customer, and then being counsellors and support therapists for half their workforce at the same time, managing the complexities that our colleagues are dealing with. So I just don't think you can stay in your lane. So the future for me is much more interconnected with the other functions of the business. And I think that's the same for other C-suite roles as well in return. I don't think it's exclusive to the CPO.
That technology driving the collaboration across all of the different areas in order to maximize it, but also to get the benefits. It's going to be a real, so go for it, Debbie.
And I was just reflecting because we've done this podcast with a number of different CPOs now, and it's interesting to talk about what bolts onto that CPO role. So yesterday we were introduced to somebody who is a chief people and agent officer. So I don't want to say they're coming for us. It's coming, and it's a combination of that kind of the new shape of workforce. But to your point, we've had CPOs who've talked about their role in terms of engagement and comms, and that comms being both internal and external. And because some of that messaging is about, this is a CPO in a water company, it's out on the utilities company, it's out on the website already, but he talks about that need to have that, first of all, alignment in terms of what your messaging is, but also that capability in, I'm a leader of an enterprise, I understand this aspect of it, let's talk about how we make some of that more engaging. And I think when we first talked, you mentioned you also have kind of transformation and product. To tell us a bit about that aspect of your role.
So I look after product, marketing, people, transformation. That's what I do here, which is a bit of a cocktail of stuff. But the comms piece is both internal and external. So I look after investor relations as well, which is why I think that is such a key part. Last year, I actually looked after our technology function as well. We made a leadership change in the function, and I held it whilst we went to market and recruited for that role. And I always considered myself quite a broad CPO, and I understand how different functions in the business work. Technology was an eye-opener, and I learned so much doing that role. I can't tell you how developmental that year was. Difficult, but it was incredibly developmental, and I'm hugely grateful for that opportunity and to the team that supported me through it.
It's a great insight to where it's all going. If you were talking to other CPOs and saying that you got obviously that benefit from having that experience, how would they go about getting that? What would your recommendation be?
It's easier said than done. I've been really lucky that the opportunities have just presented themselves. But I'll give you a story that I think brings it to life. I was a CPO at Virgin and had been there for 2 years. And our COO, who was phenomenal and a really incredible talent, came in and told me and the CEO she was pregnant and that she was going on maternity leave. So I'm sat there as a CPO having a kind of slight nervous response to that because we didn't have a succession plan in the direct reports. And the CEO was sat there going, oh, it'll be fine, you can do it. And so I never, ever believed that I could do a role like that, particularly in a sector that I'd only worked in for 2 years. And it was a clinical medical regulated sector, so it wasn't a straightforward one either. And he said something to me which was, you need operational capability, you need commercial capability, and you need leadership capability to do that job. And you've got all three. And I was a bit like, if you see that in me, then I'll have a go. And I did it. And I believe I did it very well. And it was, again, a really great experience. I wouldn't have put myself in that position. My CEO did. And it's been very similar in this role here. My CEO spoke to me and said, will you pick up transformation? Will you hold technology? I guess if I was talking to myself, I would say back yourself and put yourself forward. Don't always wait for your CEO to ask, because I've been very lucky that my CEOs are quite open-minded and quite forward-thinking. But I know that there are many that might not be quite as open-minded and forward-thinking. So I think my view on this would be, do some job swaps. And if there's a vacancy somewhere in your C-suite and you're a CPO, don't just assume that because you haven't done it that you can't do it. Because from someone who has run marketing functions, has run a whole medical, 500 million turnover medical operation, and then now doing transformation and product, I pinch myself sometimes and go, how on earth did you manage to do that? But actually feel very privileged to have been able to do it.
And it links really nicely back into what you were telling us earlier about you're wanting to look around the C-suite and go, I don't know who's in which role because everyone's coming in it and looking at it. And some of the bits that you talked about, from building credibility around empathy, curiosity, understanding how the business works, it feeds really nicely into, if you've got those things and you back yourself, then you get the opportunities come your way. That's great.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, some of the people that have given me those opportunities and that confidence has made me much more open-minded to how we think about talent mobility within the business. I probably was, in my earlier career, was a bit more traditional and thought much more about specialisms and silos. Whereas now I've been a living product of it, then I'm much more the person in the room that says, why can't this commercial director go and run new business? Or why could someone in a legal role go and run one of our operating customer service teams? So I'm really open-minded to that now. And I think it gives people breadth and experience that only adds value to them and the organisation.
And do you think that with the increase in AI, for knowledge workers especially, that might be increasing even more? So the 3 core skills that you talked about, Yusuf, having, that if you've got those, then you've got more fungibility across other areas?
Yes. And I think because some of the technical skills will be accessible through AI. So if you think about people, for example, the thing people worry about is employee relations and employment law. I can't do that because I'll land us in an employment tribunal or some other god-awful mess. But actually, as AI advances, it's doing it now, but as it advances even more, you can very easily get some very good advice that many HR professionals will have worked 10, 15 years building. So that type of stuff, I think, is going to be less important, the technical knowledge. And the things that will become much more important are skills around communication, telling the story, people engagement, judgment, decision-making, commercial acumen, all of those sorts of things. And so I think that if I was to give any advice to anyone, I'd be like, what are you getting out of your role that's giving you that experience? Because if you don't get that now, it's likely that AI will replace a lot of your technical capability. Yeah. And I always say, don't dine out on technical knowledge and skill set alone. You need leadership acumen. You need all the things I've just listed. Otherwise, and particularly with the advancement of AI, it will invariably make your value lower, if we're talking really candidly.
And therefore, the opportunity is to do your point, to play to some of those skills you mentioned earlier around empathy and curiosity and those kind of levers that will help you to build relationships in the business, keep it human, but also really add value. I think that's, we're out of time and I feel devastated about that because I feel like we could keep going for quite a while, but we have run to the end of our podcast window, unfortunately. So I think it's been really interesting, Stuart. I think it's been a fascinating deep dive into kind of what the experience of somewhere like retail or hospitality can bring to you as a CPO in your very early stages of a career, the dive into sort of the different elements of the role and why that's important. And those 3 critical skills you described, I think, were really powerful. I think that's a really good kind of walk through. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate having you on today.
No, it's been a pleasure, and thank you for the invite.
Thank you. And thank you to Gemma too for joining us on the What is a CPO podcast.
Been a pleasure.
Thank you. So thanks to everybody, and we look forward to speaking to you again on the People Agenda podcast.